You know, you've been cooped up all winter long. It's been cold. It's time to get out there and go fishing. Fishing in the pre-spawn, it's a time you can catch some giant fish. You've been cooped up, the fish have been cold. This show is going to be all about fishing that pre-spawn time of year. Thanks for joining us. This is Fishing and Hunting Texas.
From Mexico to Louisiana, the Red River down to the Laguna Madre, Texas is one big playground. Join us as we take you on some of the best outdoor adventures the Lone Star State has to offer.
There he is.
This is Fishing and Hunting Texas.
You know, when you're fishing pre-spawn, electronics are really key, from water temperature to how you set up your various units. Here's a couple of tips talking about setting those units up. You know, we're talking about electronics, Panoptix live scope. One thing about Panoptix that most guys don't really talk a whole lot about is, yeah, you can see fish, yeah, it works really great in deep water, but I use it in shallow water, especially looking at objects or vegetation. A lot of times if I'm going down a grass line that I don't know, I'm panning side to side, I can see clumps, I can see edges, I can see taller grass, shorter grass. I can see all of that stuff, and all I got to do is, to me, it's just kind of become second nature. Wherever I'm panning, that's what I'm looking at. And so as you look, like right there, that's just a hard reed line right there. I look to the left, that's a big grass clump right there to the left. So if I want to cast, I just cast right at it, and then I'll reel my bait right over that grass clump. So a lot of times it just helps you. If you're fishing the outside edge, it tells you right where the outside edge up ahead of you is, not after you've gone over it. A huge, huge key, knowing what's going on in front of you. You know, when you're fishing grass early in the year, a lot of times, one of the things you're thinking about is am I gonna fish the outside edge or am I gonna fish the inside edge? Well, what happens with grass is say deep hydrilla, it'll grow, it might grow out in 20 feet. The outside edge is 20 feet. So in 24 feet, there's no grass. 20 feet, there starts being grass, and then it starts going up, and then it'll go up, and then eventually there'll be an inside edge of the grass where a lot of times the fish actually spawn on that inside edge, those little sand holes on the inside edge. What you're trying to do as a fisherman when you get out there is figure out where those fish are. Are they on the outside? Are they up over the top? Or are they on the inside? That is a huge key pre-spawn. Fishing the outside edge of the grass, it's a pretty big fish, I think. And a lot of times when you're fishing grass lakes, sometimes you're on the inside, sometimes you get on the outside. And a lot of times, pre-spawn like this, those bigger fish, they not hook very good. They get on the outside edge before they come into spawn. That's a nice one. Ah, that one. That's awesome. Outside edge of the grass, throwing a Strike King 5XD. Man, look at the size of that fish. It just depends on how deep the grass is. If you're out on the outside edge and the grass is 20 foot, then you need something like a 6XD. You get up shallow, you're on the inside edge, you might want a red-eyed shad or maybe a vibrating jig or maybe a spinnerbait, something you can keep up over there. You're trying to find baits that'll get down to whatever depth that grass is.
Stay tuned. Fishing and Hunting Texas will be right back.
We know if you found one crappie, you may have found 1,000. We know the joy of getting your boots back in the mud. We know the journey can be more rewarding than the destination. We know the great outdoors. We love the great outdoors. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Stop by today for huge savings on the gear you need and the brands you trust. plus free 2-day shipping at basspro.com and cabela's.com.
Fishing and Hunting Texas is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Your adventure starts here. Ranger Boats, still building legends one at a time. And by Garmin. Fight your fish, not your fish finder.
You know, when I'm fishing in the pre-spawn, a lot of times I like to throw moving baits. And the reason is that pre-spawn's a time when those fish are really aggressive. They're really feeding. And so moving baits a lot of times is a big key. You know, when I'm cranking early in the year, not talking about big crankbaits, talking about smaller crankbaits, but kind of that pre-spawn time, water temperature might be in the high 40s, might be in the 50s, anywhere when you get up there to spawn, a lot of times those fish really like moving baits. What rod and reel setup do you use? Do you use a really fast reel? Do you use a really slow reel? Well, to me, it depends on what bait you've got. When I'm throwing a rattling bait, like I've got this red-eyed shad right here, I'm gonna throw a high-speed reel, at 8.3 to 1, because I can control that bait with the reel. If I really need to wind it fast, got my rod up, I'm trying to keep it up high in the water column, then I can use that reel to get me there. Sometimes a fish like a really fast presentation. A lot of times that 8.31 will do it. You know, cold water cranking is kind of a different animal. You know, a lot of times you're not trying to bump everything, but a lot of times when I'm fishing, man, I'm just thinking of all different kinds of baits. And I actually just sat down and tied on this 2-tap red-eye shad because these fish seem like they're shallow, but they're just not real aggressive. And so I got up there, I'm not bumping the bottom, but I'm just reeling it real slow. A vibrating bait like this, real tight action, will really catch them good when the water's cold. If I'm throwing just like a square bill, like a KVD 1.5, also 8.3 to 1. But then when I'm throwing something like a lucky shad, the lucky shad is a slower bait to me. I'm not wanting to bounce into cover, I'm wanting to fish that pretty slow. And so a lot of times I change and I go to a 6.8 to 1 reel. And I'm cranking like a little drain, and a lot of times when you're thinking about cranking kind of pre-spawn, when the water's colder, you know, this fish, you know, feels cold to me. A lot of times you don't want to bump into the cover. You know, a lot of times we talk about cranking docks or rocks or wood. You don't want to bump into that cover. You want to just be around cover, and that's how you catch them a lot of times in the pre-spawn. And as far as my rod goes, I use a Bass Pro Shops cranking stick. Now, this rod right here is they've got different actions. This one right here is a medium action. It's a 7 foot, that's my favorite length. If I'm throwing a really big crankbait, I might go to like a 7.6. But usually a 7 foot is what I throw, either a medium or a medium heavy, just depending on the bait. That's really my primary rods and reels that I use. You can catch those big fish when you're cranking shallow this time of year. Moving baits and keeping stuff from bouncing into the bottom. You know, you want it to be in that mid-layer water column a lot of times to catch those fish. You know, one bait I really love, early spring, pre-spawn time of year is a red-eye shad. Why do I like it? Well, first of all, they bite it really good. They want that really tight wiggle. When you look at this bait in the water, it's a really, really tight wiggle. The other thing about it is that you can dictate how fast you reel this bait on how deep it goes. And so I'm throwing a 1/2 ounce right here, and I mean, if I really want to slow it down, it gets a lot deeper. If I really want to burn it or hold my rod up really high, I can get it up higher in the water column. This is a bait that I think about this time of year almost exclusively. I love throwing it this time of year. This one right here is a 2-tap. I also throw just a regular red-eye shad, and both of them can catch them really well. That is so much fun catching them on a lipless red-eye shad, 2-tap. Good solid fish, man. That's a pre-spawn hammer. On a lipless bait, I really like throwing that with an 8.3 to 1 gear ratio. The reason is because a lot of times I'm trying to keep that bait up really high, or I may want to slow it down. I can do either as long as I got an 8.3 to 1. If I'm throwing a slower reel, then I can't get it when I really need to crank it fast.
More fishing action when Fishing and Hunting Texas returns.
Groundbreaking designs, unsurpassed quality, and unshakable confidence. Welcome to the Ranger Z500 and Z100 series. Leading the industry for over 50 years, these rigs are custom crafted and loaded with more features and advantages to deliver the ultimate ownership experience. The legendary Ranger Z series. Unleash next level performance. Evinrude E-Tech. Spend more time on the water.
What are them sons of fishes up to now?
Fellas, I give you the Force Trolling motor. It is the most powerful, the most efficient on the water.
Yep. Most powerful. We're really in trouble now.
And it's quiet, too. You can't swim here. What a dumb bass.
This portion of Fishing and Hunting Texas is brought to you by Strike King, owner, Perfection in Hooks, Sawyer, we keep you outdoors, and by TH Marine.
You know, fishing before the spawn, basically pre-spawn, a lot of times what I'm thinking is that those fish want to be higher in the water column, and they're usually aggressive, so they're going to bite moving baits. Now that's not necessarily always true, but it just holds true a lot of the time. And one of the very best baits to throw this time of year, depending on what kind of cover you're in, but especially in shallow grass, is a vibrating jig, Strike King Thunder Cricket. And I mean, this bait right here just flats catches them. Now, the key is, most of the time for me, I want to use the weight bait that basically, you know, just barely gets down in that grass so that I can jerk it up out of that grass. Because a lot of times when you jerk it free from the grass, that's when the fish will bite it. And so, you know, it just depends on the depth of the grass. If you got grass really shallow, you'll use a little bit lighter bait. If the grass is deep, you use a little bit heavier bait. But it's just a bait, and a lot of times what I've found this time of year is that you've got to wind it really, really slow. I mean, you see it in the water, and it's just, you know, it's just vibrating along. I put a blade minnow, Strike King blade minnow on the back of it, just match the color of the bait. Typically is what I like to do. Right now I'm throwing a bluegill, and I mean, it's just a bait that I've got a lot of confidence in. It wins a lot of tournaments and will flat catch you some big fish. You know, one little key, this is Strike King Thunder Cricket with a Thunder Cricket, is this time of year, almost always, fish it really slow, like you can barely feel it vibrate. If you start getting where it's really thumping your rod good and you're reeling it really fast, a lot of times that's just too fast. I was really reeling slow on that one. You know, jerkbait fishing is one of those techniques that you've got to have the exact right rod. And the reason is because, man, it just can wear your arm out, your forearm out. You know, you look at your all day long, you're jerking, jerk, pause, jerk, pause. And that can really be hard on you. So you need a fairly light rod. I use a Johnny Morris Signature Series Platinum rod. The one I've got on right here is 6'9", and it's a medium action. To me, any lighter than that and it doesn't give the right action, any heavier than that, it doesn't give the right action. You know, we just put our boat in the water and fishing over the top of grass, and you know, a lot of times you kind of look at the water clarity, but a jerkbait can be a really good option. This is a Strike King J200 and had 3 bites real quick and feel like it's fixing to get good. And usually when I'm jerk baiting somewhere in the 10, 12, 14 pound test, I probably got 10 or 12 on the most, but it just kind of depends on how much cover I've got to pull fish through once I hook them. And it's usually the cover is kind of what dictates how heavy a line I want. You know, one thing that tends to happen pre-spawn is those fish, they tend to get around stuff, up around stuff. They want to suspend, and especially in grass. We're fishing over hydrilla right now. It's not a real big one, but fishing over hydrilla right now, and basically just fishing a jerk bait around it. The other things I could do is get a crankbait down in it, get a, you know, a vibrating jig down in it, maybe a swim jig through it, maybe a swim bait over the top of it, but you got to remember, those fish in the pre-spawn, they want to be up high in the water column.
More fishing tips are coming your way when Fishing and Hunting Texas returns.
When you spray on a layer of Sawyer's permethrin insect repellent, you've just sprayed on adventure. Sawyer, we keep you outdoors.
I got my power pole down, stuck in the mud in the bottom of the lake, sitting so still in the wind and the waves, could even be a hurricane. I got my power pole down.
This portion of Fishing and Hunting Texas is brought to you in part by Engel Coolers, the original high-performance cooler, Sunline, the strength to guarantee your confidence, and by Outdoor Action. Watch the outdoors anytime.
You know, probably one of the very best baits to fish during the pre-spawn is a jig. Here's a tip that talks all about jig fishing and why you fish it. You know, without a doubt, the most versatile bait there is a jig. And the reason is because there's so many different jigs. It's a bait that catches big fish. It's a bait that you can fish in finesse situations. You can fish it out deep. You can wind it. You can fish it through grass. You can do just about anything with it, and it catches huge fish. Why do you use a jig though? Well, when you look at a jig, say in a swimming pool or in really clear water, you look at that bait, look at how those strands kind of pulse. Yeah, first bass of the day. Fishing a jig, you know, you can always get some bites on a jig around docks. This is a Strike King skipping jig. It's just a really easy bait to get up under these docks, even with bait casting equipment. Not a big one, but it's a fish. You know, when you're thinking about rods for a jig, almost always you're going to fish a fairly stiff rod. In other words, not a light action, Maybe a medium action, just depending on what you're trying to do with it, but a lot of times a medium heavy. Because basically when a bass bites this, you've got to go through the fish's mouth and this weed guard's got to collapse. And so you've got to put enough pressure to catch him. Basically when he gets it in his mouth, you're pulling hard enough. So a lot of times I like a medium heavy. My favorite rod to flip is a carbon light. I either like a medium or medium heavy. And if I'm casting, a lot of times I'm gonna throw a Platinum Series 7.4 because I like that rod out in open water. It's a little bit longer rod and it works really well also. I love catching them, throwing a jig early in the year a lot of times. Catch them on the shallow part of docks, you can catch them on deeper part of docks. Nice fish right there. You know, when you look at these jigs, they're all different. This one's a skipping jig, this is a football jig, this is a structure jig. I could also have a swimming jig. There's a bunch of different head shapes and they all act a little bit different. It depends on what kind of cover I fish it in. And so when I'm pulling each one of these along the bottom, they'll react just a little bit differently depending on what kind of cover I'm pulling them through. Now, another thing you can change on a jig is the trailer. This right here is a baby rage crawl, but I've got a lot of different options. This is a junior chunk. This one right here doesn't flap as much. And so a lot of times I'll throw the chunks in really cold water. I've also got a bigger rage crawl. This is just a regular everyday rage crawl. It's a lot slower presentation. And then this is a menace. It's a fast little trailer. It really moves fast. So it just depends on the situation on what you might throw and maybe the size fish that you're thinking you might get a bite on. You know, a lot of times when the water's a little bit colder, usually pre-spawn, I'm thinking about transitions. What are different transitions that will hold fish? Well, a lot of times it might be pea gravel to sand, or it might be pea gravel to chunk rock, or chunk rock to bluff rock. Or it might be a transition where it's sand and then there's a little patch of rock. There's all kinds of different transitions you see, and sometimes it's in the kind of rock that's there. That's a good one. You know, a lot of times when you're fishing pre-spawn, those fish are just lethargic, and we always want to throw winding bait, something really, really fast. And a lot of times you just got to slow down and, you know, take a jig, take a Carolina rig, something really slow, and you can get a big bite like this. Both kinds can work equally well. A lot of times it's trial and error, but if you can figure it out during the day of fishing, then you can actually use it as a pattern and actually look for more places that look that same way, whether it be shallow to deep, rock, whatever the case may be. One thing you have to realize is those fish suspend a lot in the pre-spawn. A lot of times this time of year they suspend, so it's not always that you want to be bumping that rock, but that's what holds those fish. Hey, thanks for joining us on today's show. Get out there and fish during the pre-spawn. It's a time you can catch some huge fish. And if you get the opportunity, like us on our Facebook, message us, let us know where you'd like to see us fish all around this great state. We'd love to hear from you.
Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Fishing and Hunting Texas.
Probably one of the #1 questions I get, what line do I use?
That's a big debate. On every tour out there, everybody's debating which line.
I choose the simple side. My choice of line is Sunline.
One of my favorite lines to use is Sunline.
How all can you use it? Anywhere you want to. Anywhere there's water and bass, it's good. Walleye, catfish, trout, speckled trout, sharks. There we go. I don't say this unless I think it's true, but honestly, it's the best in the market.